Something strange began happening about 3 months ago at the Willowbrook Wildlife Sanctuary, tucked away in the misty foothills where ancient forests meet rolling meadows. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Shadow, the majestic gray wolf with his silver charcoal coat and piercing amber eyes, would suddenly rise from his resting place beneath the old oak tree. With deliberate steps, his large paws pressing softly into the damp earth, he would make his way to Sarah Reynolds. He pressed his powerful, warm body against her legs, nuzzling his broad muzzle into the palm of her hand, his breath warm and steady. Then, with quiet insistence, he positioned himself between her and any approaching staff or the enclosure's edge, his head held high, eyes scanning the surroundings with an alert vigilance that sent a subtle unease through those observing. At first, these moments occurred a handful of times throughout the long days, but the frequency grew. Day by day, it escalated until it was happening nearly 20 times each day. 20 distinct moments of protection, of deep physical connection. Only with Sarah, with the other keepers, Shadow maintained his usual dignified reserve, watching from afar with calm indifference. But for her, something had changed. Something profound and deeply unsettling in its intensity. Dr. Emily Carter, a seasoned ethologist who has dedicated her career to unraveling the mysteries of animal cognition and emotion at wildlife sanctuaries worldwide, was called in to observe and document these behaviors. In her quiet, measured voice, she would later reflect on the first time she witnessed it. There was a weight to the air, a sense of something ancient and knowing unfolding before their eyes. Sarah Reynolds, at 57 years old, carries the quiet strength of someone who has given 25 years of her life to the care of these wild souls at Willowbrook. Her presence is one of gentle authority, her movements slow and deliberate, her voice a soft murmur that seems to soothe even the most restless animals. She is a woman of few words, but immense compassion. Her life woven into the daily rhythms of the sanctuary. The early morning feeds, the evening checks, the unspoken understandings built over decades. Shadow came into her world 23 years ago as a fragile, orphaned pup, his tiny body trembling with fear after tragedy had claimed his pack. From those first tentative days, a bond formed that would span a lifetime. Over the years, Sarah had been his constant, the one he trusted completely, the one whose scent and voice meant safety and companionship. He was no ordinary wolf. His usual personality was one of quiet majesty and independence, patrolling his territory with a natural grace. Yet with Sarah, he revealed a softer side, leaning into her touch, following her footsteps through the enclosure like a shadow indeed. As the weeks passed, the sanctuary staff grew increasingly concerned and perplexed. They began meticulously logging each incident. Detailed charts and video recordings captured the patterns. Approximately 20 times daily, Shadow would engage in these protective gestures. His body language was unmistakable. Ears forward, tail low but wagging slightly at the tip in recognition. A low, rumbling whine escaping his throat as he pressed close. The physicality was intimate and vivid. He would rest his heavy head against her hip, his eyes half closed in what seemed like both comfort and watchfulness. His fur, thick and slightly coarse, brushed against her uniform as he circled her protectively, his breathing syncing with hers in the quiet of the enclosure. Inside the tall wire fences, the daily scenes played out like a silent, emotional dance. Sarah would step through the gate in the soft light of dawn, the air crisp with the scent of pine and earth. Almost immediately, Shadow would appear, emerging from the underbrush with purposeful strides. He approached without hesitation, his golden amber gaze locking onto her face. There was no rush in his movement, but an undeniable urgency in the way he leaned his full weight against her side, as if to steady her or draw her attention. Other keepers watched from the viewing platform, their faces etched with confusion. Whispers passed between them. Why only Sarah? What was driving this change in their usually stoic resident wolf? The mystery hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken questions and a growing sense of wonder mixed with quiet sadness. Little did they know, Shadow was sensing something far deeper, something that would soon reveal itself in the most heart-wrenching of ways. As the days turned into weeks, the sanctuary staff watched with growing concern as Shadow's behavior became more pronounced. They began meticulously documenting every instance, filling thick notebooks and digital logs with observations that painted a picture of deepening devotion mixed with an almost desperate protectiveness. Charts appeared on the staff room wall, lines rising steadily, bars climbing from 5 or 6 interactions in the early days to a consistent 20 or more each day. Video recordings captured the patterns in quiet detail. The precise moment Shadow would rise, the angle of his ears, the subtle shift in his breathing. In the soft golden light of afternoon, when the enclosure was bathed in dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, Sarah would sit on the weathered wooden bench beside the small stream. Shadow would emerge from the underbrush without a sound, his large paws pressing silently into the mossy earth. He would lower his massive head into her lap, the thick silver-gray fur warm against her thighs. His amber eyes closing slowly as a deep, rumbling sigh vibrated through his chest and into her body. His weight leaned fully against her side, steady and anchoring, as though he could hold her in place against whatever unseen force pulled at her. His tail gave a slow, gentle wag, the tip brushing the grass in quiet rhythm, while his ears remained forward, alert to every rustle beyond the tall wire fence. The other keepers observed from the viewing platform, their faces etched with quiet bewilderment. When they entered the enclosure themselves, Shadow kept his distance, watching with calm detachment, his golden gaze steady but remote. Only Sarah drew this response, this profound physical need to be close, to touch, to guard. Dr. Emily Carter reviewed the footage late into the evenings, the glow of the screen reflecting in her thoughtful eyes. "It's not random," she murmured to the team during their quiet meetings. "Every gesture carries intention. The way he positions himself between Sarah and the gate, the way his body molds to hers. It speaks of something ancient, something rooted in trust that has grown into protection." Yet the mystery lingered in the air like morning mist, thick with unspoken questions and a gathering melancholy. To truly understand the depth of what was unfolding, we must travel back 25 years, to the very beginning of their bond. It was a cold autumn morning in the foothills when a tiny orphaned wolf pup was brought to Willowbrook. His mother and siblings had perished in a tragic accident along the nearby highway. The pup, barely 8 weeks old, his fur still soft and downy, his tiny frame trembling with fear and cold, was named Shadow by the young keeper who first held him. Sarah Reynolds was 25 then, new to the sanctuary, but already carrying a quiet steadiness that drew even the most frightened animals toward her. She had lost her own way in the world after personal heartbreak, and caring for these wild souls had become her anchor. The pup was terrified. He cowered in the corner of the quarantine pen, ears flattened, body pressed against the cold concrete, a soft, high-pitched whine escaping his throat with every approaching footstep. For days he refused food, his small ribs visible beneath his coat, his amber eyes wide with the raw terror of abandonment. Sarah spent hours sitting just outside the pen, speaking in the softest murmur, her voice like a gentle breeze through pine needles. She did not force contact. She simply sat day after day, letting her presence become familiar, letting her scent, calm, steady, human, drift through the wire mesh. Then came the breakthrough moment, one that would bind their lives forever. It was late evening, the sanctuary lights low and golden. Sarah had placed a small piece of warm meat just inside the pen door and remained motionless. The pup, driven by hunger and something deeper, crept forward on shaky legs. His nose twitched, catching her scent fully for the first time. Inch by trembling inch he approached, until his cold, wet nose brushed the back of her hand. A spark passed between them, unspoken, electric. Slowly, hesitantly, he leaned his tiny body against her fingers. Sarah felt the rapid flutter of his heartbeat through his fragile ribs. She did not move. She simply breathed with him, letting the moment stretch into eternity. That night, Shadow curled against her side for the first time, his small form rising and falling in sync with her own quiet breathing, a soft whimper of relief escaping as sleep finally claimed him. From that night forward, they became inseparable. Sarah bottle-fed him, walked with him through the enclosure as he grew, taught him the rhythms of sanctuary life without ever breaking his wild spirit. He followed her footsteps like a living shadow, his growing paws padding beside her boots. When storms rolled in and thunder shook the hills, he pressed against her legs, seeking the safety only she could give. Over the years, their bond deepened into something the staff described in hushed tones as almost sacred. Sarah's gentle authority and Shadow's quiet majesty created a partnership that transcended keeper and animal. He patrolled the enclosure with natural grace, yet always returned to her, leaning his heavier frame against her hip in silent greeting, his eyes half closed in trust. Now, 25 years later, that same trust had transformed into something more urgent, more protective. The logs continued to fill. The daily scenes inside the enclosure carried a new weight, a quiet tension that no one could yet name. But Shadow knew. In ways the human heart could only begin to fathom, he had already sensed the shadow falling across the woman who had been his world for a quarter of a century. As the sanctuary team pored over the mounting evidence, Dr. Emily Carter knew it was time to call in another voice, someone who could bridge the gap between observed behavior and the hidden language of biology. Dr. Michael Lang, a renowned animal cognition specialist with years studying the sensory worlds of wolves and their profound attunement to human physiology, arrived one overcast morning. He moved through the enclosure with quiet respect, his notebook in hand, eyes following every nuance of Shadow's movements. What Dr. Lang observed was not mere affection, but a symphony of detection that science could only begin to translate into words. Wolves possess an olfactory system of astonishing precision, hundreds of millions of scent receptors capable of discerning chemical shifts, so subtle they evade human instruments. Sarah's body, Dr. Lang explained in a voice soft with wonder, had begun to change months earlier. A quiet illness had taken root, one the doctors would later confirm through blood work and scans. An aggressive form of lymphoma, its early markers invisible to the eye, yet unmistakable to a nose tuned by evolution to survival and bond. Volatile organic compounds in her breath, the faint alteration in her sweat, even the shifting hormones of fatigue. These were the signals Shadow had caught long before any symptom surfaced. It was empathy forged in chemistry, intelligence expressed not in words, but in the raw language of presence. The correlation was heartbreaking in its clarity. As Sarah's energy began to wane, her steps a fraction slower across the dew-kissed grass, her shoulders carrying a new, almost imperceptible weight, Shadow's protective rituals intensified. 20 times a day became his rhythm of devotion. In the pale light of dawn, he would rise and press his forehead gently against her sternum, his warm breath fanning across her chest, as if listening to the very beat of her heart. His eyes, those amber pools of ancient knowing, would lock onto hers with a depth that made the air feel heavier. Sarah would kneel then, her fingers sinking into the thick ruff of fur at his neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath. A low, throaty rumble, not quite a growl, not quite a whimper, would vibrate from his chest into her palms, a sound the staff had never heard before. It was comfort given and received, a dialogue without language. One particularly poignant afternoon, rain pattered softly against the leaves as Sarah moved through her chores. Her hands trembled slightly on the feed bucket, a sign only Shadow seemed to notice. He was there in an instant, his massive body curving around hers like a living shield, tail tucked low in quiet concern. He nudged her elbow with his muzzle, guiding her to the bench, then settled his full weight against her legs, head resting on her knee. His ears flicked at every distant sound, but his gaze never left her face. The other keepers watched from afar, their own eyes misting as they realized this was no longer routine care. This was guardianship born of love that transcended species. Dr. Lang's gentle analysis brought both solace and sorrow. "He isn't just protecting her from the world outside," he said during a hushed team briefing. "He's guarding her from the storm within. Wolves form bonds that rewire their very nervous systems. Sarah's scent has been his constant for 25 years. When it changed, so did his world. He's offering what he can, his warmth, his vigilance, his unwavering presence, because he senses she needs it more than ever." The poetry of it lingered in the enclosure. The way Shadow's breathing would slow to match hers during those long, quiet embraces. The subtle way his paw would rest lightly on her boot, as if anchoring her to the earth they shared. Yet even as understanding dawned, the emotional weight grew heavier. Sarah's decline, once hidden, became more visible in the small gestures, the longer pauses she took to catch her breath, the way she leaned into Shadow's strength rather than offering hers so freely. And through it all, he remained her sentinel, his body a warm, living promise that she was not alone. As the weeks pressed on, Sarah's condition became undeniable to everyone. The sanctuary arranged for her to spend her remaining time within the enclosure she had called home for a quarter-century, surrounded by the earth and trees that had witnessed their bond's entire life. Shadow sensed the finality before any of them spoke it aloud. His protective rituals deepened into something almost sacred, occurring with unwavering frequency, 20 times each day, sometimes more, each one a quiet act of farewell wrapped in fierce devotion. The emotional peak arrived in the soft hush of twilight, when the enclosure glowed with the last amber light filtering through the leaves. Sarah, now frail and moving with careful slowness, lowered herself onto the mossy ground near the stream. Shadow approached without hesitation, his powerful frame moving with a tenderness that belied his size. He circled her once, then pressed his entire body against hers, enveloping her in warmth. His broad chest rested against her lap, his massive head tucked beneath her chin, muzzle warm and damp against the hollow of her throat. A low, trembling whine rose from his throat, soft, keening sounds that echoed like quiet grief, the kind wolves make when mourning lost pack members. His amber eyes, half-lidded, never left her face. Tears did not fall from them, but the sorrow was palpable in every shuddering breath, every gentle push of his nose against her cheek as if to say, "I am here. I will not let you go alone." Sarah's arms encircled his neck, her fingers sinking deep into the thick silver-gray fur, feeling the rapid flutter of his pulse beneath. She held him tightly, their breathing falling into perfect rhythm, the rise and fall of his ribs mirroring her own weakening ones. The hug stretched for many long minutes, time dissolving around them. Other staff watched from the gate, their own eyes stinging, as Shadow's tail curled protectively around her hip, his ears flicking at every distant sound, yet his focus remaining absolute. "You've been my everything, Shadow," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of sound. "From that first night when you were so small and scared, you chose me. Thank you for protecting me now. I love you more than I can ever say." He answered with another soft whine, pressing closer, his body a living shield against the gathering dark. Days later, in the quiet of early morning, Sarah passed peacefully on that same patch of earth, Shadow curled beside her. His final protective gesture was to rest his head on her still chest, eyes closed, as if willing her heart to beat once more. When the staff gently approached, he did not move at first. Only a deep, guttural keen escaped him, a sound of raw, animal grief that carried across the sanctuary and into the surrounding hills. In the aftermath, the enclosure felt emptier than the staff could have imagined. Shadow mourned with a depth that shattered every observer. For weeks he refused food, pacing the paths they had walked together, stopping at the bench where she once sat, and lowering his head as if expecting her hand. Nights were filled with his solitary howls, long, haunting calls that rose and fell like questions without answers. Months later, keepers would still find him in the same spot, pressing his body against the empty air, nuzzling the ground where her scent lingered faintly, performing the protective hug ritual to a ghost only he could see. His eyes, once bright with quiet majesty, now held a quiet, enduring sadness that spoke of a bond unbroken even by death. Dr. Emily Carter stood at the fence one final evening, watching Shadow rest beneath the old oak, and spoke with the same quiet compassion that had guided them all. This is what animal intelligence and empathy truly look like, not in tricks or commands, but in 20 years of silent knowing, in sensing the unseen storm and offering one's entire being as shelter. Shadow didn't just protect Sarah. He reminded us that love between species can be as profound, as selfless as any we know. In his grief, we see the raw truth. These bonds leave marks on the soul that time cannot erase. If this story touched you, write yes in the comments and answer honestly. If you had a friend like this for 25 years, would you have the strength to say goodbye? If this story moved you, consider subscribing so you don't miss future stories like this. Thank you for listening.